In 2024, EV sales in the United States increased by 21%, from about 1.4 million units in 2023 to 1.7 million units for 2024. In that same time period, California EV-based startup Rivian sales increased by 300%. They delivered over 50,000 models last year. And it wasn't just their impressive sales figures that made 2024 a big year for Rivian. They unveiled 3 new models, the R2, R3, and R3X. They came out with a second generation of their R1 products, the R1T and R1S, and they announced a massive new partnership with Volkswagen. Beside me is a 2025 Rivian R1T Tri, now in its second generation, and this is a new motor configuration for the product. So let's dive into this vehicle, see what's new, and see what that means for the brand. All right. R1T Tri. So in the first generation Rivian R1T and R1S, they were available in both dual motor and quad motor setups. Those quad motor vehicles were signified by their yellow accents with the brake calipers and Rivian badges, and they produced 835 horsepower. Now for this second generation R1 products, Rivian is introducing this tri-motor setup, which produces more horsepower than the previous quad motors. Now 850 horsepower out of this 3-motor setup, 1 motor up front, 2 motors around back. So the yellow accents now signify tri-motor status with the brake calipers and behind the letters, because the horsepower and performance figures are so similar. Second generation Rivian R1T and R1S quad motor vehicles are now signified by dark blue accents on the brake calipers and badging, and they make over 1,000 horsepower. And Rivian is kind of proposing the R1T Tri as the best of both worlds, because you get 850 horsepower and 0 to 60 in less than 3 seconds, but in conserve mode, the truck can disconnect the rear motors and solely power itself by the front motor, pushing the range over 400 miles, 405 miles in conserve mode. Now with these wheels and tires, you're looking at closer to 390 miles in conserve mode, but that is still a massive figure for a big, heavy truck like this. In all-purpose mode, with the most efficient wheels and tires, you're looking at 370 miles per charge, and with these, closer to 340. Still very impressive. R1T Tri is only available with the max battery pack of 140 kilowatt hours. Okay, so there's a new tri-motor setup and the quad motor now makes more horsepower, but how does this constitute a second generation product? Because visually and in the ways you're gonna interact with the vehicle, it doesn't seem all that different. I mean, this looks almost exactly like the first generation product. And most of the changes have come underneath. Rivian has completely reworked the wiring, the batteries, and the motors in order to give this car more range and more power. It is really a very different vehicle underneath. But again, in how you interact with the car, it's not that different, and you're mostly just going to notice those increased ranges and horsepower figures, which is a plus. But let's go around and look at the few changes that there are physically to this second generation R1T. Now it starts up front where the turn signals shown here in a type of hazard function have moved much lower down to kind of like a fog light area. This frees up the DRLs from having to change amber from white when you put your turn signal on and interrupting this signature light pattern. That's why Rivian has moved it down here. And when they are in their turn signal function, they do slide across rather elegantly. So another change that Rivian has made to the lighting around front and around back is the addition of this secondary light bar beneath the primary light bar. Right now it is shown in a roadside lighting animation, which is basically additionally to the hazard lights, you can turn on this section to attempt to like direct traffic, basically. Say you're blocking a lane of traffic, maybe the middle lane, this is trying to direct traffic like a construction sign, like a police car. It's pretty subtle, it's not that bright, probably best used at night, but it is a cool feature that Rivian has added. This is also where you can see your charging status while the vehicle is charging. It will flash green to show how much battery the battery has, how much charge the battery has, and flash across as it's charging. So there are a few cool animations that Rivian has added with this secondary light bar beneath the front light bar, and this secondary light bar again is repeated around back. There are also new wheel designs. These are the 22-inch sport wheels, which I don't think are new, but say the new aero rim design, which for this tri-motor setup would eke out its 405 miles of range in conserve mode. And the only other visual changes on the outside are the options of dark badging now, like where it says Rivian and R1T, versus it having to be chrome only now you can get these darker options that I think look quite nice. But especially in the tri and quad motor Rivian R1 products, which feature the new Ascend interior, it's inside that you're going to notice a lot of upgrades for the Rivian R1T and R1S. The overall layout is very familiar, but the attention to detail in some of the design elements is really next level. So in terms of space, this chair is adjusted to a little behind my ideal driving position. I'm 6'2", but I still have plenty of knee room, foot room, and headroom. But it's really, again, the design and the materials that are quite beautiful back here. This is the lighter interior option. There's a dark one and this lighter one. The dark one features green accents. This lighter one kind of features gray accents. And you get a lot of plaid design elements throughout this interior. And where they have chosen to incorporate those plaid accents is pretty impressive. So you have little sections on the sides of the headrests that have that plaid material, which is quite elegant. I think the seats are some of the most beautiful parts of this interior. They are absolutely gorgeous to look at. You get the plaid motif stitched into the actual leather. You have your subtle Rivian logo off center and then a Rivian script across kind of the shoulder area, which looks absolutely beautiful in this, like, I think it's plastic, but kind of metal looking material. You get the plaid material again in the straps for the seat back pockets, which is really pretty to see. Again, in the carpets. And then on the inside of the grab handles, you also have that plaid material. And lastly, in the cubbies of the doors, when you pull out the cubbies, the straps, the elastic straps that bring them back in are also made out of that plaid material. So even in places where you're not going to be looking all that often, they have really paid attention and given those elegant design and nice materials, which is something that so few OEMs do. Now, shutting this door again, we can notice another new change for second generation Rivian R1 products. They've removed the physical door handles from the doors, and instead you just have a button you press that unlocks the door, and then you push the door open. I kind of prefer the physical door handle, but I'm not too peeved about that. And up front, you get the same very elegant design. I think especially the steering wheel with this two-tone light and black exterior just looks really, really good. Now, another change that Rivian has made for the second generation R1 products is they've gotten rid of their carabiner key fob, which I was quite a fan of. And now you need to use the app, or if you don't want to use the app, Rivian will provide you this key card-like thing, which you tap to the door handles in order to unlock and lock, and then you place here on the center console and put your foot on the brake, and now we are ready to drive. It's an okay solution. I still would have preferred just the typical carabiner key fob, a bit more standard, but Rivian, you know, they're trying to be the modern EV startup that they are, and that is also reflected in kind of how you interact with the vehicle. There is a dearth of physical controls, which isn't necessarily my favorite. Happily, we do have typical window switches and traditional seat controls. They are exactly where you would expect them to be, which is nice. Turn signal stock, turn signal indicator, and windshield wiper stock, and then a column-mounted gear selector. Everything else is definitely very software intensive, and their software isn't bad. It's just not as easy to interact with a screen while driving as with physical controls, hence why I prefer physical controls. For example, to adjust where the air is flowing, you have to tap on the climate control settings and then move this little tab around in order to adjust where the air is flowing. And some simple controls are buried a little bit in the menu. So you have to tap on your profile in order to adjust the steering wheel and side view mirror controls. And then you select one, and then you use the buttons on the steering wheel in order to adjust their positioning. So if I wanted to, this is the steering wheel. If I wanted to adjust the side view mirrors, I select side view mirrors and then use the left side of the steering wheel in order to adjust that mirror. Not my favorite setup. I would much prefer buttons, but I do understand that this isn't something that people are going to be doing all the time. And then you have a lot of quick controls as well that you can access, like opening the front, opening the tailgate. We have an electrochromatic glass roof, which is nice. So at the top of the button, it becomes transparent. At the top of the screen again, it becomes opaque. Happy to see that there is an electrochromatic option for this glass roof, because I'm not a fan of fixed glass roofs, especially without shades. But this one does have the electrochromatic option, again, which is nice. But yeah, a lot of stuff is in this screen. Basically everything is controlled through the screen, but we also don't have Apple CarPlay and we don't have Android Auto, and that is just a bit annoying. Happily, you can connect your Spotify and Apple Music accounts directly to the car, so you don't have to worry about like Bluetooth connection, because I have just been using Bluetooth to play my music, and it's simply not as elegant of a solution as CarPlay. I still would much prefer CarPlay present because the navigation system is fine, but it's not as smart as something like Waze, Google Maps, or sometimes even Apple Maps. I've known faster routes a couple of times while using this navigation system, and I've taken them, and then suddenly my ETA drops by 5 minutes. Simply not the smartest navigation system, and you don't get your text messages, things like that. That's why I prefer CarPlay. It's just simple, it's easy, and on a big screen like this, it would look beautiful, but Rivian's CEO has doubled down on the fact that they won't offer CarPlay on any of their future products, so that's a bit of a shame. Overall, though, this system is very fast. It's very easy to use. There are new drive mode animations powered by Unreal Engine. So if I go into drive right now, I can switch into conserve mode, which again changes the range, and we get fun little transitions here. Also, if we go into the energy bar or tab, we can see what our range would be based on the different drive modes. So right now in conserve mode, I'm getting 242 miles of range. But I can see in all-purpose mode that would drop to 211 miles, or in sport mode 208 miles, and it would also show me what I would get on a full charge, which is partially based on these 22-inch sport wheels and my driving habits. So right now it says on conserve mode I would achieve 390 miles of range. Yesterday it was showing 393 miles of range on a full charge, so it's learning that I don't drive that economically and adjusting the range prediction as a result. So that's pretty cool to see that it does that. It's saying for my driving style with these wheels, 340 miles on a full charge in all-purpose mode, which is still a very decent, range. Now, we also have this really cool cluster that shows us a lot of information about the car: PSI, motor temperatures, battery temperature, our elevation. And we can also see our trip computer. I've driven 87 miles on this car, and I've averaged 1.97 miles per kilowatt hour, which isn't great. Using that figure, that would equate our range to be about 280 miles, because this is a 140 kilowatt hour battery pack. So again, not quite as much as Rivian has advertised, but I have not been driving that economically. But when you have a car this powerful, it's just so fun to floor it all the time. So, that is kind of a detriment to one of these more powerful models. The dual motor Rivian R1Ts definitely get a bit more range. You can also adjust your suspension feel, the regenerative braking, and your suspension height from the lowest setting, which is 8.6 inches of ground clearance in the conserve mode, because there's actually 5 different levels based on your drive mode. And if we go into, say, all-purpose mode and raise to 14.1 inches, so from 8.6 to 14.1, that's a pretty big delta between the different air suspension heights, which is really cool to see. Let's go back to on-road. All-purpose will lower us back down. So yeah, there's a lot you can do in here, and it's pretty elegant, pretty simple. Not my favorite. Overall, the cabin is such a vibe. Rivian did a great job, but now let's get this truck out on the road to see what this tri-motor setup is like to drive. All right, driving the Rivian R1T Tri and giving it some electricity here. Yes, it is definitely very quick. There is no doubt about that. 0 to 60 in under 3 seconds in this tri-motor setup is definitely achievable. So I'm in the sport mode right now with the ride feel on firm, and firm is definitely how I would describe the suspension setup right now. You bounce in this car when it's in firm mode. We're in the lowest setting. The car looks absolutely spectacular, all squatted up with only 8.6 inches of ground clearance. But yeah, you feel all the bumps in firm mode. I can go into soft in this drive mode, but I think it's better to go into all-purpose to really feel the soft drive mode. It's never plush in the Rivian R1 products. There's no masking this vehicle's weight, and Rivian doesn't really do that with the suspension. It's definitely more accepting of bumps in the soft mode. There's a noticeable difference. It's more comfortable. But you still feel this car's weight. If you have a harsh impact, it comes into the cabin. These are not the most luxuriously comfortable floaty vehicles you are ever going to drive, but what they are is impressively dynamic for the size of the vehicle in a side-to-side motion. They remain shockingly flat around corners, both R1T and R1S. And going back to suspension for one moment, it is R1S that is going to receive the best or the most suspension improvements, because for the first generation R1S, it had a really unacceptably harsh ride, and they've kind of solved that for second generation. They have made a lot of suspension improvements to that vehicle. R1T always had a fine ride, and it continues to have a fine ride. But again, going back to cornering, that's really where the R1 chassis, I think, is most impressive, because these are large. This is a large truck, and the R1S is a large SUV, but they can corner like crazy well. I think because the suspension can get so low and you have so much weight down low, they really have leaned into the low center of gravity of these vehicles and given them some really impressive cornering capabilities. So not only does this have great straight line performance, obviously, as an EV with 850 horsepower, but it also has great cornering capabilities, which is, I think, more impressive. And that's aided by very quick steering in this R1T. So all of that's very impressive, right? The performance of this vehicle, obviously. But remember, Rivian is trying to sell this as the best of both worlds vehicle. And I would say they've really achieved that, because cruising along at 60 miles an hour, it's very comfortable in here as well. Again, suspension, not the most impressive, but it's still very acceptable and very content just cruising down the road. Even on these 22-inch sport wheels, it's fairly quiet in here. I think these seats are pretty comfortable. There's no like massage or anything like that, but that's fine. It's just the overall demeanor. It's so effortless in the Rivian R1T, mostly because of the horsepower. I think all EVs feel relatively effortless. And this R1T Tri is no exception. It's very easy around town. You have a great seating position, a little higher up, but this cabin is also just such a pleasant space to spend time. So in terms of driving dynamics, I am very impressed by this vehicle. It's not quite as comfortable as, say, the Ford F-150 Lightning. That is definitely a more comfort-oriented electric pickup truck. The seats are really comfortable. I think the suspension is really soft. This is a bit more athletic, definitely more dynamic, and it's not just because this is the tri-motor one with 850 horsepower. All Rivians feel a bit firmer in an athletic way than, say, like the Lightning or some other EVs I've driven. But I'm still very impressed. It's still a very acceptable driving experience comfort-wise. And yeah, crazy fast, and not just in a straight line. It can corner like no truck or SUV should. Okay, but it doesn't have a great turning circle. I have noticed that. There's no rear wheel steering on Rivian R1T or R1S, and you definitely notice that it does not turn on a dime. Going into my parking space in my apartment, it's like typically takes me 2 times to get in straight where I want to be. It's a little bit of a tighter spot with cars on either side, so where I want to be, where I'm not going to be at risk of getting door dents from my parking neighbors, typically I pull in, back out, pull in. With this truck, I have to pull in, pull out, pull in, pull out, pull in. Like, it takes me a whole extra attempt to park this truck right, just because it is so, the turning circle is really not great. So in that sense, it's not excellent in an urban setting, but its smaller footprint does help in city driving. Just out of curiosity, I'm gonna floor it in conserve mode. Still pretty quick, but it definitely took a moment, and I think that's because when you're driving around in conserve mode, it's only the front motor, and definitely noticeably slower. But if you request power, say you need to make an emergency maneuver, you need to accelerate quicker, I think the rear motors do kick back on then and help push you forward. So I'm gonna actually test that. So right now I can see that I'm only receiving power to the front wheels, but I'm gonna build up a little gap between the car in front of me. If I floor it, yeah, the rear wheels do then show up on this little graphic that's showing me where I'm getting my power. So that's kind of cool to see how Rivian has been able to give you still power when you need it based on kind of how intensely you're pressing the accelerator, but also give you a lot of range when you don't need the increased power. So when you're driving around regularly, it's only going to be that front motor pulling the car along. But if you floor it, don't worry, it's not like you're locked out of those rear motors. You can still accelerate the truck as needed, which is pretty cool to see. So that's the 2025 Rivian R1T Tri. Basically, Rivian has conducted some pretty subtle updates to what was already an impressive truck. Now, it's $100,000 to get this tri-motor setup, which is definitely a pretty penny, but that's also right in line with Tesla's Cyber Beast, which is the tri-motor version of the Cybertruck. And this vehicle definitely represents a more approachable package, and with the ability to disconnect the rear motors, more range. I'm really impressed by this truck, and I think Rivian has created an excellent vehicle with it. Thanks for watching. Like, comment, share, and subscribe, and I'll catch you guys in my next video.